Hey all, welcome back to Looking Outside. Warning, today's conversation is going to contain a little bit of swearing, a lot of ranting, hopefully, definitely a ton of laughter. That's because I've got my good friend Ryan Barry on the show. We're going to talk about insights, leadership, visioning, branding, what makes these things great, and where the bullshit comes in. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, everybody. Psyched to be here.
Yeah, and if you listen to Ryan's podcast, you'll be like, yes,
Yeah,
stealing
it's
Ryan
gonna
for
be
a little
fun.
bit.
It's also nice to just be chilling and be in your capable hands. You know, when you're running a podcast, you have to be thoughtful and really listen, but not forget what you're going to say. And so this is going to be fun for me. So thank you for being in charge.
Of course, it's a lot of bloody work to
It sure
run a
is.
podcast, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But let's start with a little bit of an intro into who Ryan is.
Perfect. So my name is Ryan. I live west of Boston, Mass. I've lived in New England most of my life, and I have a beautiful wife who keeps me honest, 3 kids that keep me young, and a dog, Honey, who keeps me outside. I've been working in some varying capacity of consumer insights my whole career, and the reason for that isn't because I'm a market research guy. It's because I think businesses that are employee and customer centric grow in a modern paradigm, and businesses that aren't are fucked. And so my passion really stems from that belief and a desire to help everybody around the world make more customer centric decisions as they think about now, next, and later. And so that leads me to I've been really lucky to be part of building a company from the ground up for the last 10 years called Zappi. It's an ad and innovation testing platform that uses consumer data to help brands make better decisions, and held a bunch of different roles. But I lead the company today, and it's a ton of fun.
Amazing,
I think
yeah.
that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's a good nutshell. I do have an important starting question as an Australian is, do you have an Aussie nickname? Because I've got like 3 for you that you can choose from.
Okay, let's choose, because I don't have an Aussie nickname, but I will own now.
Okay, so Bazza.
I've heard Bazza before, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the other two?
That would be my favorite. Rhino.
Okay, one of my very best friends, who's not Australian, he's from Brooklyn. He calls me Rhino. Okay, what's the third one?
Okay. RB. It's a bit,
Okay, so I've
bit
actually been
universal,
called
that
all
one.
3 of those before in my life.
Okay.
I've been called many worse things too, listeners, which we don't need to get into today. So so I like Bazzer because that actually feels uniquely Australian to me. So
It does.
let's hold a twist
Yeah,
on.
okay. Thanks, Bazza. All right.
What's
So,
your Australian nickname? Is it just Joe?
Joby for some reason. Yeah, I don't know why. Or like Joey, Jojo.
Joby
Yeah, just
sounds
any.
cool if you have your
Yeah.
accent. Like I have this
Mm.
nasally northeastern Joby. I don't think people want to hear that.
Well, so speaking of which, like how would you describe yourself in one word? Because you've done so many different things, like your boss, your father, your dog dad, your husband, obviously, Bostonian. What's one word that you would normally use to introduce yourself?
I think passionate would probably be it. If I think of all the things you just said, and you know this about me because we've talked a lot, dinner or whatever, but I really only have 2 speeds, on or off, and I do everything with kind of all of me, for better or worse. One of my customers, Kate, told me that. I said to her, so sorry, I got a little pissed off in the meeting today. She said, no, we love that about you, dude. You're passionate. So yeah, passionate for the word.
Hmm. Passionate is great. And also frank. Because like I was going to say honest, but it's not even like honesty is kind of can be a little bit like structured and politicized in a way sometimes, but frank is just real. Like, and you're very real. I can imagine that that's really refreshing when you have a leader of an organization that is just so like transparent and tells you exactly where you stand. I'm sure that's really appreciated in your organization.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, obviously, it requires a type of person who wants frank, and that attracts certain types of people, all walks of life to want to be there. But yeah, I mean, we've led a company through a pivot, a pandemic, an acquisition, and we still have sub 6% involuntary attrition. So I think there's something to do with that. It's interesting though. It's not all being frank has its challenges, right? So
Mm-hmm.
There's two that come to mind. When I was a younger individual contributor, it was like, oh, this hot shot is refreshing. And then you quickly forget that you're leading humans. And so
Mm-hmm.
you need to be like thoughtful of how to be frank and when. And in a similar vein, you're dealing with investors, shareholders, et cetera, and you need to think of how to package things there. Because if you're passionate and frank, you might avoid being tactful at some points in time, which I've certainly told you how that.
I think it's also quite nice that you, like we talked about this when I came on your podcast, actually, that you're consistent. Like you can tone it down or tone it up if you need to, but you're consistent no matter where you see Bazar. He's the same, like on the podcast, in a boardroom conversation, like that you're still gonna get Ryan.
Yeah, it's true. Did I ever tell you why that happened to me? Did I ever tell you
No?
the story, Chris? So I've been in, my career started in research management, customer management, whatever. And I used to live in a small apartment and I was working from home. This is like before working from home was cool. Now I work from home all the time. And Jill, who's my wife, comes in and she's like, I gotta tell you something. I'm like, what? She said, I fucking hate your work voice. I was like, what do you mean my work voice? And then she like made fun of me. And it was like this like overly bubbly, like, yes, Joe, your market research survey is gonna go up. And you know when someone says something to you and it just cuts through everything, all your wiring, and it like forces a change? That happened to me in that moment. And the truth is, I started just being the same. I don't care if we're at a bar, if you work for me, if I work for you, if you're $1 million customer. I mean, I was on a very big call with your team a couple weeks ago and just acting the same way I am here. And I found it to be, well, it's easier to live because you're not wearing 50 different masks.
Mhm.
It's been a huge unlock for me. It doesn't mean I'm not intentional about how I show up to things, but it's like my personality is not going to be different.
I was going to say, has it? But I'm sure it has. When has it backfired on you?
Yeah. So when it backfires is I could really in those two constructs I was sharing. So I play with a lot of passion and I'm running a business. And so you're super close to the details, like technical details, customer details, financial details. And so if you're talking that fast and dealing with somebody who's maybe got a lot of great things to say, but they're on the outside of the business, you could be quite punchy. And that's not always
Hmm.
appreciated in like a hierarchical sense. And then I think in the other sense, and this is something I work with my coach on a lot, like as a leader, sometimes your job isn't to be assertive, it's actually just to listen. And
Hmm.
I want to say probably 6, 7 years ago, I did a lot of work on like, okay, if we're having a one-on-one, my only objective is your objective. And so it doesn't mean I'm not going to shoot straight, be approachable, be myself, but like I need to like chill and let you talk because this yourself, Joe. You're a great leader. Like most of the times, everybody has the answer in their head. Sometimes they just need help like getting it out, right? So like that's those are my two areas where I've had to learn like maybe you're a little too
Mm.
much, dog. Just turn it down a bit.
That is a really tricky transition for a leader. I think a lot of people really struggle with that. I just finished some leadership training at McDonald's, and it was one of the big areas of focus is being a great leader or being a great coach is about listening and almost like getting something out of your team. So when they ask you for the answer, don't give them the answer or tell them what to do. It's a hard transition because as the leader, you are the expert and you've obviously built the credibility, like particularly being in the role that you're in. I can imagine that a lot of people would defer to you as like even if they have an opinion, your say is the ultimate final say.
So one of the things that's just a little hack that I don't do it anymore formally, but I used to do it formally, is if you sit down every day and say, okay, I'm in a meeting with Joe. What's my objective? What's her objective? What's my disposition? I'm in a staff meeting. I'm communicating. What's my disposition? And sort of now I just do muscle memory, like get to a meeting and say like, okay, am I asserting? Am I unblocking? Am I listening? Or do I even need to be in the damn room? Which a lot
Right.
of times you don't need to be in the room if you have good people on your team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it's definitely a little
absolutely.
tricky.
What's your disposition? I really like that. That's awesome. I actually did have like a whole set of questions for you specifically about leadership. But I think that the one that I wanted to ask you the most about is leading with remote work, flexible work standards that are now in place. So you work remote. I read in an interview that you gave that 67% of your staff is based in the UK. How do you consider predisposition virtually or through emails where a lot of these things can be misconstrued?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I don't know that I've cracked it, so I'll just share like what I try to do. And I'll just start with remote work for a second. When I was starting my career, I had the benefit of working in an office, and I actually played golf with this guy. He was one of my first mentors this week. And I used to go into this VP, Jeff McCarrick's his name. I used to go into his office with a notebook like 100 times a day and be like, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And he was so gracious and patient. And I think a lot of people that are starting in a career or pivoting into a career struggle without that apprenticeship opportunity. And I give a lot of people younger in their career advice, like, find an environment that does put you in an office, because it's hard to do the gotta minutes, the, hey, Joe, you want to go grab a coffees remote. But I have experience navigating it. I mean, I built Zappi basically from the ground up with Steve. We've never lived in the same country. It's been 10 years. And, picking up the phone a lot matters, just for a quick few minutes. Finding time every day just to speak is one thing. I think the other is over communicating context is one of my leadership principles. I'm extremely transparent. I get off a meeting with the board and I put a Slack voice memo, and I always do voice memos, not written word, particularly because A, you can transcribe voice memos and read it if you don't want to do that. But B, I think tone gets lost in written word, particularly because I'm not like particularly a great writer. So like I'll oftentimes be like with our C-suite, like, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I'm seeing. This is what's happening. And that I think helps keep people fluid. And then the other is like, I from a leadership perspective, I've been doing an internal weekly video for 5 years, every single Wednesday, called the Wednesday video. 80% of the company at least watches it. And it's very much unstructured, what I see going on in our business. And I think that helps people. Where I think it's really foreign is like, if you haven't built human shortcuts with people, and I believe you have to do that in person. Like, you have to break bread with people. You have to go for walks with people. You have to share experience with people so you can understand, like, okay, when Joe's stressed, this is how she is. When Joe's excited, this is how she is. And really think about like how you can catch each other in stride. That's the only way to actually make this distributed environment work in like a high trust, high collaboration, high pace way. So I don't know if that was even made sense, but it's hard, right? So it just requires a lot of like over communication, getting on planes for the right moments and the right time, and then using modern asynchronous tools to like talk to each other. But I think it's quite challenging, and some companies are obviously swinging all the way back to like in the office multiple days a week, and I find that to be quite arbitrary. Like, hey, let's just like randomly decide on Tuesdays we go in, and it's like, why Tuesday?
Well, I think it's really nice to hear you say also that the in-person interaction is really important, particularly because you do work fully remotely, but you're recognizing that there's nothing that quite replaces that bump into a person that you haven't seen and they give you a smile, and you have a random kind of conversation that sparks something for you at the coffee machine. Like, it sounds a little bit cliched, but that does happen, and so many of the relationships that we build at work happen that way. And I was talking to actually the US business just yesterday about this, that this is the big concern for the next generation of workers, particularly the ones that have left college and are coming into the workplace for the first time, that started off completely remote. They don't know how to do that. That's not, that there's a rise of kind of social awkwardness, of loneliness, of not feeling like you belong. And then they come into this physical workplace on a random Tuesday where probably nobody else is in the office anyway, and they don't really know how to interact with people. And that's why it's so important that we allow them to mimic our behavior, that we're demonstrating almost how you do it.
Fuck work for a sec. I think about this as a father of young kids. Like, you work in the future a lot, right? Like, what's the workplace going to look like in 20 years when my 5-year-old son's getting out of school? Well, it's going to look completely different. And so if he doesn't have compassion and critical thinking and human empathy and the ability to like connect with people, he's screwed. But like, that's not exactly what he's getting taught at school, right? It's like, there's how to type on a MacBook, and, a lot of stuff that computers are just going to do. And, it actually does. I find it to be quite stressful as a citizen of the world. Like, the skills that you need to thrive in the future are here today. Yeah, a lot of people just aren't equipped with them. In a world where everything's changing, this like old adage, like, what isn't going to change? And It is humans and how they connect and how they communicate. And
even in the context of like what potentially technology is going to replace and what's going to be automated and outsourced, and with all of that stuff, even with that being true, to your point, there is still the human to human interaction, and a human being designing something, whether it's a strategy or a product or communication, to another human being. So that's never going to go away. I think that's a really good reflection. All right. Well, I think that the other thing that I took away from what you said, which is really important, is communication. So I actually read a quote this morning that I didn't write it down, but it was along the lines of, the worst thing that can happen is when we assume communication has taken place.
Yeah.
Right. So like the clarity of communication, consistency of communication, and then a humanization of that through, in your case, your voice.
No, there's a woman that I like beginning in my career, I honestly idolized. Her name's Diane Hesson. She founded this business called C-Space. Well, it was called CommuniSpace. And then she worked in the Hillary Clinton campaign where she did like a research community, and then she worked for the Boston Globe. Anyways, I went from admiring her from the sidelines to her being willing to have lunch with me a couple times a year, which is like super cool. And she told me in the early days of CommuniSpace, now we're going back like a long time, she used to leave a voicemail once a week on Sundays for the staff. I was like, what an amazing idea. So I just do it. I click Loom. I did it yesterday. And it's something super casual. So I'll tell you, yesterday, it was Wednesday. I do it every Wednesday. We have a global workforce. So I gave everybody some context of what Juneteenth is. I celebrated the Boston Celtics because I love the Boston Celtics. And we created these new agents that allow you to query the data to create products. And I did it live with prompts on the screen. And whereas the week before, I was welcoming someone back from maternity leave and had her on as a guest. And so it's sort of like whatever's topical in that moment. And because it's like a mixture into me as a human, current events, what's going on in the business, I find people find more natural ways to be like, hey, I saw this and I was thinking about this. What do you think? And that helps me stay sharp. Like keeping a pulse on people isn't just like the line management throughout the company's job. I believe it's my job. I got to keep a pulse on what's happening so I can lead us.
Are you encouraging a response from people when you post those things?
Yeah, I do. I mean, we post it on email, Slack. The great thing about Loom is there's a comment and chat feature, so people engage right in it.
That's cool.
And then people are taking the piss, they're joking, whatever, and that's quite helpful. But I try to encourage a lot of like, I don't know if you know this phrase will translate to everybody listening, but I love nothing more than gotta minutes as a leader. Someone's like, do you have 5? I just want to riff with you. And like, I would rather do that all day than like formal cadences and fixed like Zoom one-on-ones where you stare at each other awkwardly. Like the gotta minutes are the best when they happen.
Yeah, I love that. It's a little bit opportunistic as well, but in the best possible way, right? Because then the gotta minute is around actually needing the minute as opposed to just like wasting, I was going to say stealing, wasting somebody's time. And it's opportunistic because it's like it's relevant to the moment, contextual, and impactful.
Yes, because you can help, and that's when you can see yourself really helping someone. Like, I'm thinking through this, and as a leader, sometimes you need to like understand, and as a spouse too, like sometimes people just want sounding more their only solution. And asking that question may be awkward, but it's helpful. Like particularly if someone's like, "Oh, I'm trying to deal with Joe and she's being difficult," and it's like, I don't want to be a Joe navigator for you. Let me coach you on how to deal with it. Sometimes you have to balance those things.
Yeah, totally. And I can be difficult, so that's accurate.
I've never seen that side of it. Who knows? I hope
not
to.
Yet. Not yet.
Yeah,
Not
we'll
yet.
get there. Well, we'll
get
part
there.
2 when we piss each other off at some point.
Yeah, just like one day you'll be like, got a minute, I'm really ticked off with you. Oh wait, why did I say ticked off? Pissed off with you. So actually that little censorship of my swearing just then leads me to the next question I was going to ask you, which is how we formulate ourselves. So particularly now that you have the newsletter, Inside Insights, the podcast, you do public speaking, like I know we joked about this before, but you have a personal brand on LinkedIn. So you have to be quite structured, I think, in how you come across. Like there's a little bit of a formula that tends to happen. And even like on this podcast, as I'm asking you questions, and you know this better than anyone, I'm thinking about ask an insightful question, make sure it's relevant, make sure it's interesting, sound articulate, don't swear. Like there's a lot of structure that goes around being in the public space, but then you have to still be authentic and just yourself. So how do you balance that?
For me, it's like I'm only going to talk about things I'm knowledgeable about assertively. And if I'm not knowledgeable about them, I'm just going to be super curious. And those two things have helped me get over the imposter syndrome, which everybody's got, right? Like, should I still be
Mhm.
doing this? Am I the right person? Do I even have a business being on this podcast? Whatever. And it's like, shit, just talk about something you
Yes.
either know. And if you don't, like, just ask questions. So, I mean, that's sort of been like my thing. I had this unlock. So I came up in like commercial roles, right? And when I took this job 4 years ago, I started managing our engineering teams. I don't know. I've never written a line of code in my life. I'm never going to write a line of code. I find myself to be a much better coach for our CTO, Brendan, than our head of sales because I actually don't know how to do his job, right? So I'm just like, I'm genuinely sitting there curious, like, say more, say more, say more. And then a lot of times he'll leave the call and be like, thanks, that's helpful. And I'm like, shit, I just learned a ton. It was helpful for me. But anyways, that's sort of where it is. So like with the newsletter, I assert about things that I feel passionate about, and I'm very willing to receive criticism.
But that's kind of the best, like for lack of a better word, influencers or ambassadors or public advocates are the ones that aren't doing it to be in the spotlight. They're pulled into it.
Like, let's be real. People have always had a bullshit meter, but one of the things that is certainly here now and it's gonna stay, and it's the same thing for people or businesses. Humans bullshit meter is way up. Like
Mhm.
there's AI bots taking over famous athletes' mouths, and my 9-year-old kid's like, "That's not LeBron James. That's bullshit, Dad." And so, I think it's
Wow.
actually a good thing for the world that like the human tolerance for inauthenticity, what is fake, what isn't real, is at a premium. Go back to the beginning. That's why I'm passionate about customer-centered growth because people see right through the S. I mean, how many brands? And I'm sorry if I'm offending your employer now. How many brands changed their logo to put a fucking rainbow in it this month? And like,
Hmm.
good for you, but like, does that actually stand to your values and how you show up in a community? If it does, even better. But if it really does, you probably
Hmm.
don't need the rainbow logo because everybody already knows that about you.
Slight deviation in the topic, but I like it. There's an inconsistency there because some brands will put it out in the Western markets, but not in the Middle East markets
Yes.
because it's, illegal there. So, like, is it something that you stand for as a brand, or is it something that you only stand for in the places where you can profit from it?
Yeah. It's really
Mm,
hard to disentangle your personal values from
mm,
the values of your business. I'll give you a real example. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we meaning me, and at the time our CMO emotionally was like, we're not doing business in Russia anymore. And a few of our staff members were like, what the fuck? Like, we sell to companies who sell sugar to kids. We sell to companies who sell cigarettes. We do
mm,
business in this country. And it's like, ooh, right. And so we had to at that time codify principles of like, okay, we're actually not a political organization. It was a really
mm,
helpful challenge that we got from within the organization to be like, you know what? That
mhm.
was an emotional decision. We shouldn't just do that because we need to be able to, stand by what we do.
And I mean, that whole topic is really obviously complex. And like the big thing that I was noticing during that time was, for example, food companies that were removing themselves from that. Like the first thing that I was thinking was that's still human beings that need their grocery and need like baby formula and baby nappies and like who is actually being punished in this situation. Okay, but these topics are really complex, but I think it's great that people from within your organization actually even just had a voice to be able to say like, is this the right decision for the company, or what other decisions do we need to reevaluate based on what you're talking about here?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, you create a space where you ask people to speak up. They're going
Right.
to.
Right.
And I mean, I can't tell because we've brought in like outside VPs and they're like, I just wish people would be quiet and listen to us. Doesn't mean you're going to like what you hear all the time, but like sometimes it's important. And I vividly remember that we had 3 people challenge us. We sat at a meeting and we defined the company's geopolitical principles, and it was fantastic. We published them, and now we've like adapted them since. Like that
Oh, that's
wouldn't happen
cool.
if you weren't willing to listen to people.
And sometimes you need a crisis to pull together a crisis team and create
Yeah,
something that you can kind of live by.
so true.
That's a great example of bullshit being called out. What about in a more, I guess it's not really simple, but a more simplistic sense from a customer centric strategy market research perspective? Like you would have seen a lot of bullshit happening in this space over time, and particularly in the 10 years in your time at Zappi, like how the methods have really evolved, the expectations of a researcher or a marketer have really evolved over the last decade.
I mean, technology's enabled the customer to be around more. It's enabled us to mine conversations to predict trends. It's enabled us to ask people questions on the fly. It's enabled us to codify what we know and disseminate that. And that's a huge unlock, which means there's really no excuse not to have them at the table. But we talked a little while ago about what doesn't change, and I still think like you want the bullshit free podcast. That's what Joe told me before we joined. Bullshit free today. Corporate structures still don't incentivize doing the right things. There's still too many people who get remunerated to ship something independent of if it creates value for the organization or its community. Too many people are at Cannes right now putting out stupid advertisements that are going to win awards but not sell more burgers, and they're placating their egos at a Tyla concert later. And that's ridiculous. Like, so there's still a lot of stuff that I sit there and I'm like, let me guess. You have a corporate sustainability initiative, you have a customer centricity initiative, but you treat your insights VP like they're an order taker. You haven't invested in the capability, and it's still a validation exercise for marketing. Now, I want to meet those companies where they are and help them as a supplier to the industry. But I think people need to be more mindful of what they say and how they actually do, because what defines us is what we do, not what we say. If you don't fix that, the matrix is going to be void of people. Name me a company, big or small. They're on some digital transformation journey to get all their data in some data warehouse. And all this market research data lives in PowerPoints in people's heads. We got two choices: embed that shit in the matrix and have a voice of culture in our prompts with culture agents, respondent agents, whatever agents, or don't. And then everybody's ads are going to look the same, and everybody's products are going to look the same.
I mean, arguably all ads really do look the same today for the majority of brands. This is the funny thing for me about Cannes is like you're going there to celebrate creativity, but the majority of the presentations that I've seen people humble brag about on LinkedIn are well, nobody notices your advertising and it's not actually working and it's not effective and we're in a deficit of creativity and we need to inject humor into advertising and all of these messages that are now coming out. But at the same time, you've got like these photos of people holding up their awards like they're winning an Oscar or they've won the Olympics or something like that. It's like, what are you celebrating? And therefore, what are we as an industry celebrating? Because to your point, it's not necessarily anything that's actually benefiting a customer.
No. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. Every single year, the week of Cannes and the week of the Super Bowl, every VP of Insights around the world is scrambling to give their CMOs some fodder to look good in front of their boss. I've noticed this trend recently where there's in-house marketing orgs. So creative, media, strategy, it's all in-house. Everybody's a shareholder. They're selling a shit ton, and they're not at Cannes this week. And there's an interesting reason for that. It's what's actually motivating it. Now, if there are ways to measure creativity, and there are, it's a good thing to build long-term brands. You know, if you're being creative and bold and building, I mean, McDonald's more than really most companies on the planet has been hammering those arches, and they're so recognizable. And that coupled with creativity and consistency sells a shit ton of burgers everywhere. I don't know how many Cannes awards you get off of that, but what you do get is continued growth through a lot of tough times. I want to celebrate creativity too. I just think sometimes the motivation is the award, not the impact on business, or the impact on people. Like, on somebody, nobody wants to buy a cheeseburger that's moldy. And I don't think that led to more sales, but it certainly led to a couple of people getting celebrated in the French Riviera a couple of years ago.
Like, to be clear, this podcast is not brought to you by McDonald's. I remember seeing those ads as well way before my time at McDonald's and just being like, isn't the first rule of food advertising to make it appealing? Don't you want to get people to want to eat your product? Like, who cares what other secondary, third, fourth order messaging you're trying to convey? So it's almost like we've become a little bit too clever in some cases, or maybe we're too influenced by advertising agencies.
We analyzed a bunch of what drives sales, and some of it is not the sexy stuff people thought. It was the basics, like, barbecue sauce and bacon sells burgers in America. Just do more of that. It's like, cool. Let's do a bunch of that. And, it is interesting. Creativity for creativity's sake.
That's also connected into something else that I've kind of noticed with a lot of the things that you write about, which is like I know recently you wrote about action matters just as much as planning, which I think is so, so important, but also a vision matters. Like, what is your end goal? And I know you've written a little bit about how, like with Zappi, you have a vision. There is an end goal or an end state.
We rolled out a vision 3 years ago, a new vision. It's the second time we've rolled out a vision in 10 years. And we're 2.5 years closer to it than we were 2.5 years ago. And you have to constantly remind people, like, this is what we said, this is where we're going. Because the day-to-day BAU, you know this in your foresight work, like BAU in short-term earnings can really erode long-term thinking. And you have to find the right ways to infuse, like maybe we're going to do incremental thinking. Maybe we're going to blow it up, but we need to get closer to our goal every single day. Like one of our co-founders, Dave, has this quote that I just love, which is like, you don't get to the North Pole by driving south. Whether it's a little step or a major step, you need to be able to look at each decision and make sure you're anchoring yourself closer. And that doesn't always mean being pragmatic and incremental. Sometimes it's like everything within this ball of wax is just wrong. It's littered with debt. It's littered with legacy. We just need to create something new. But it's increasingly hard. Like you have shareholders, you have short-term numbers to hit. In your case, at your job, you've got franchisees to deal with. And so balancing, it's like the ultimate power of paradox. Like balancing short-termism with long-term thinking, it requires execution. It requires having a vision. And it's obviously easier when the company's top line is performing in the short term. But everybody knows the short-term results are, maybe not everybody knows, Q2's results are a byproduct of things and decisions that were made 3-4 quarters ago, not today. And I think there's an interesting lag of like you make a decision in Q2 and what that does to your business 2 years later, you'll still feel it. But that's your point about execution. Sometimes people just need to shut up and do things. I mean, how many decisions are like complete one ways? Like, the Jeff Bezos one way to me door thing, like many, just try stuff and be willing to fail and learn.
Well, you also need a permission to go and do things because I think a lot of the times we assume is not given to us, or we actually are not given the agency to be able to act on great ideas.
Yeah, and that's a tough environment. That sort of starts at the top. Like if you're in an overly controlling environment where you're not given the permission to fail, well, you won't innovate. I mean, there was a time, I'm in the business of selling data. There was a time where we had moved really fast, and as a result, there's a lot of data bugs. And if you have data bugs in your data business, that's a problem. And I remember writing our CTO, like, the fear has crept in. And this is like 7 years ago. What do you mean the fear's crept in? He's like, no one's willing to innovate because they're worried about getting shouted at by some person. And you can't have the fear, because the fear is like, okay, let's eke out some EBITDA gains and some small growth numbers. And in 10 years, it will be someone else's problem. Like, I don't know. I just don't want to be part of that environment. That's not something I'm willing to do. But, like if you're going to not have the fear, well, sometimes you're going to bleed because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to, and that's okay. And that's why by the way, that's why the employee and consumer-centered growth thing guides me, because like I can navigate a pandemic because the first thing I did was talk to my customers and my people, and then look at cash. We're good. Now let's keep going, and so on and so forth.
It all kind of plays into everything that you do as a leader. So we're definitely going to need to take two, Baza, because like we only scratched the surface today, and it was a super interesting conversation. So I promised ranting. I think we both had a couple of rants. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone, if we offended you. We meant it with love.
We're not sorry though, really.
Yeah, we're not sorry, but we did mean it with love.
We did, yeah, always with love. Definitely a lot of laughs, not enough swearing. So next time we're gonna have to really bring out the C bombs and the F bombs. So we'll see if we can go there. We did.
You had the gloves off. I had tequila. I don't remember what you had in Chicago. And I remember my friend Rob came and met us and was like, "What are you two on about? We should have recorded that shit. That would have been heaven."
We should have. Yeah, definitely. Although I don't know if that would be published, but we could have recorded it.
It still would have been funny to listen to.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we'll have to do a take two. But I really appreciate you coming on. I do have one last question for you, of course. What is your go-to when you're trying to get outside of your own head?
Outside. Quite literally outside. Nature, whether it's out in the ocean, walking through the woods. We share this in common. We're both dog lovers. I'm going to go get lost in the woods with my dog after this. Mountains. Doesn't mean I don't read. Like, I'm constantly reading and consuming stuff, but I just find your subconscious is so powerful when you get away from reality, and nature forces you to do that. So get outside more, everybody. Quite
Yeah.
literally looking outside. It's a beautiful thing.
There you go. Yeah. Go on a 4 mile walk with your dog in bare feet,
It's a class.
in flip
I
flops.
told Joe this before we recorded. I'm an idiot. Yesterday I went for a 4 mile walk with my dog, and I forgot to put sneakers on, so I cut myself up. But it's all right. I still had a great afternoon.
Yeah, I'm sure Honey loved it as well.
She did. She
Beautiful.
definitely did.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, Ryan, thank you so much for the conversation. I loved it. Take 2 is definitely coming with more swearing. Look out for that. In the meantime, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks everybody for listening. This was super fun.